Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our October 3rd Tuesday at 3 or 3TT Webcast series event, Lift and Shift, your next cloud move. My name is Alan Falcon. I am the CEO and Pragmatic Evangelist here at Cumulus Global, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and your busy week to join us to hopefully get a little bit of education, some new ideas and information that you can use and take back to your business and apply it to help you achieve the business results you're looking for. As with all of our webcasts, the audio is muted to prevent any background noise from getting in the way. So if at any point in time you have the question or a comment, please use the questions window. There's an icon along the top or right-hand side of your screen. Click it, open the window, ask away. Also, the session is being recorded. We generally get it posted within 24 hours. We'll send you a link once it is. Feel free to share if you have colleagues who might find this content useful. A reminder about our events and resources. All of our 3TT webcasts are available on demand, as are our Coffee and Cloud webcasts. The Coffee and Cloud series, they're shorter, 15 to 20 minutes in length on a very specific topic. Our most popular Coffee and Cloud webcast right now is about breach response, about all of the components you need should you have a data breach that exposes private information, and a service we offer in breach response that provides you with the forensics, the legal, the marketing, the communications assistance you need, as well as $250,000 of cyber insurance that does not require any security audit or underwriting. Another thing we have out and available right now as a reminder is as part of our advanced threat protection program. If you're interested, we'll be happy to do a free scan of the dark web to see if any of your business identities, if your user accounts have been compromised, either from your systems or because your employees are using their email work address, their work email address and a similar password on services like LinkedIn or House, Zynga. There have been a whole slew of third-party breaches that could pose a risk to your domain. And also in our resources, we have a number of demos and trials available. So take a look. Always visit our resource center. When we talk about lift and shift and sort of your next move in the cloud, we're really talking about some of the challenges that we're facing right now. And it's interesting, we talked about lift and shift. We talked about moving servers to the cloud several months ago, but not much interest then, but then things have changed, right? We've got more people working remotely, and it's one thing to be able to check your email and your calendar remotely or edit a file. It's another to actually use one of your operational business systems. So when we look at moving things from your on-premise environment up into the cloud and making that transfer, we're really looking for 5 things, and the acronym is PARCS: performance, availability, reliability, cost, and security. And so when we look at traditional remote access, and what's interesting is we see a lot of people who've slipped into this traditional method of remote access, right? Workers who don't normally work at home are now working at home or working remotely. You've got people who might be alternating working at home and working in the office, who've never worked out of the office on more than an occasional basis in the past. And so, there are quick and easy solutions that aren't particularly expensive, but they introduce conveniences. So when we look at traditional remote access, there are a number of components. One are the devices. What devices do your people use? It's not just from your laptop. It could be from your phone or your mobile device. And it could be Mac, it could be PC or Linux laptop, or maybe people are running, working from home and they're using their home computer because they didn't have an opportunity to move their desktop from their office to their home. And so, you have to address the issue of what device people are accessing from. The next is the connection. How good is the connection that folks have from home, and what type of connection are you running? The third component is the internet or the broadband service into your business, because remember, when you're working with remote access, the data is coming into your business, which is in internet terms downward data or downflow data, and it's also going from your servers and your on-premise devices back out to your remote users, which is the upload side of it. So many businesses, particularly in the small and mid-sized business community, have broadband service that's asymmetrical. Faster downloads, slower uploads. Well, if you're accessing remote, you need the exact opposite. And so you might have performance issues there. Hopefully your environment's protected by at least a firewall. Depending on how you're securing your remote access users, you might also have a VPN gateway or specific remote access servers to facilitate that communication. And again, this is all additional layers of overhead. And in some instances, we still see small businesses using technology that's best known as the remote PC technology, where you have a PC on your local area network in your office, and you connect to that PC remotely, share its screen, and do your work that way. Now, all of these components of traditional remote access create problems with performance. First issue is your layering on, right? So you have your remote desktop software, or you have VPN client software. That's an additional login. It's an additional set of protocols. It comes in. When you look at the speed of your connections, layering VPN traffic, over or inefficient remote access services over a limited broadband connection that people might have at their house, or an overstressed broadband connection to your office is going to cause trouble. Firewalls, VPN, gateways, remote access servers are all additional levels of management and protocol that come into play that can reduce performance, can impact availability and reliability, and certainly add to the cost. And the least efficient method is that remote PC method I alluded to earlier, because you're actually you have one person using two full client devices to get their work done. And again, you're generating traffic on your local area network, and you're generating comparable traffic out to your remote devices. And so there are a lot of issues that we face with traditional remote access. So what do we mean when we talk about lift and shift? We're talking about moving on-premise servers, physical or virtual, to a cloud resident server or service. It's sometimes referred to as rehosting. And this lift and shift can be done as is or with modifications. In fact, when you look at lifting and shifting, there are a number of migration strategies. Some people will say, hey, you've got an old system, doesn't work remotely, people can't access it from out of the office and they need to. Maybe you can retire it. Or maybe you have to retain it because it's connected to your manufacturing equipment or your distribution systems, and there's a need for it to be on premise. But if that's not the case, the first step is to effectively rehost, which says we're going to take an image of that physical server or a copy of that virtual server. We're going to move it onto a virtual server in the cloud, creating a virtually private network within a public cloud service that's secure to you. And you'll use a remote desktop service, not a remote PC, a remote desktop, and we'll talk about the difference in a bit, to access that information securely. The next step is to replatform, which is to say, okay, great. I've got a business database and it runs on a Microsoft SQL Server on premise. Yep, I can lift that SQL Server and build a SQL Server on a virtual Windows server in Microsoft Azure or on Google Cloud Platform. Or I can do what's known as a replatform, which is replace the virtualized SQL Server with the Microsoft Azure SQL Service. And it's a little semantic there. So going from server to service, you're now starting to use the native components and services within Microsoft Azure. There's some cost efficiencies and administrative efficiencies, as well as some potential security benefits to doing that. But getting from point A to point B is a little more complex, will cost a little more, take a little more time. A lot of people, when they look to migrate, will simply repurchase. Hey, we run the Sage 100 accounting system. Sage has a very good cloud equivalent of those Sage 100 system. If you don't have heavy customizations or you haven't integrated third-party modules, then you might simply say, hey, we'll retire the on-premise license and we'll move to their cloud license and repurpose. And then the final is Refactor, when this usually comes in play if you've had something custom built. And that, yes, you can rehost it and just move it from point A to point B. You might even be able to replatform pieces of it. But the reality is, the nature of it, there's so many great services built into GCP or Microsoft Azure that you're simply going to rebuild and recreate that business application using the services and the microservices available in the cloud. And so when we look at these in a little more detail, most of what we're talking here today is about rehosting, where we're going to move those existing servers to cloud servers, keep the configuration similar, will provide either network to network or remote desktop access. And what's nice about this is it's easy to optimize for both performance and cost, both in the cost of migration and in your operating cost. And really the key to successful rehosting is making sure that you have not only the servers you need and the storage, but you have the other things that you would have if it was on premise. You want sound identity management. Now, Active Directory in Azure for the cloud is very different than Active Directory for on-premise systems, but it does provide, and it's really actually more applicable because it focuses on protecting your identity as a user and controlling your access to the services and the data that are resident in the cloud. You want to have backup recovery and continuity solutions. Now, what's nice about moving into the cloud is some of that continuity can be built in that you can deploy servers that are already, have high availability and already mirror or reside across multiple domains or multiple data centers. But you still need to manage your data and deal with the same types of data loss issues you could have outside of hardware failures. User error, deliberate deletion, software errors that cause data corruption. And so you want that backup recovery environment as well. And finally, you've got your security permissions and your data loss prevention. Much that you manage your file systems and your application security on premise, you'll do that in the cloud as well. The nice part is there's potential for more security integration in the cloud that makes it easier to automate, easier to manage. Now, for some of us, we could look at replatforming as well. And that's where you're rehosting your environment, but you're going to modify portions of the architecture to leverage cloud efficiencies. And so some of that might be, as my prior example, moving an SQL server to SQL services. Some of it might be taking, if you have a lot of disk space on premise, when you move it to the cloud, you may look at your data and say, hey, 40% of that is frontline tier 1. We access it all the time. It's highly transactional. But that other 60% can be tiered off to a lower cost mechanism. It's more archive and information we're going to use as a reference. And then you can also connect your business apps to the collaboration suite. And so, for example, of that business app running on Microsoft SQL Server, even if you decide not to move it to SQL services as you move into the cloud, the fact is you can connect that backend SQL database into a workspace in Power BI and generate reports, do data dashboards with drill downs, track your KPIs, and even if you undergo a dashboard in a day type exercise, you can get more value out of your data, more visibility. So there are benefits to considering re-platform. Most of our small mid-sized company clients will look at repurchasing. And again, this is where you're replacing an existing system with a new cloud solution. It's most common in file servers, right? Where we might have people moving a file server to OneDrive and SharePoint file services in the Microsoft space, or to Google Drive and shared drives in the G Suite space. We also see organizations that can moving from QuickBooks, a desktop version, to their SaaS version or their cloud version, online version of QuickBooks. And then we see the third area we see the most common in our market space for repurposing is moving contact management or an on-premise CRM tool into a cloud-based such as Copper or Salesforce, something similar of that. Refactoring is less common with small and mid-sized enterprises because, quite honestly, as small businesses, we don't necessarily have the wherewithal and the budget and the resources to do this. Because refactoring is really the reimagining of how a business application is architected and built. And you're going to use those cloud native features and even get into not just the big macro level services, but the microservices as well. Now, for those where it's appropriate, you have the ability to add features. You have the ability to create better scaling and performance by leveraging those cloud native services. It is a new architecture, and oftentimes organizations realize that it's 100% rebuild. So again, very uncommon in the SMB, small mid-sized business, even low mid-market companies. Upper mid-market enterprises definitely look to refactoring. And what's interesting is one of the things that we see even in the media is when you hear about all these companies doing amazing things For example, in AWS or in GCP or in Azure, when they're larger companies, they're basically refactoring, they're rebuilding their systems to run natively in that environment. And that's great, and it creates a lot of buzz and excitement about the cloud, but the reality is for us as small, mid-sized businesses, strategically looking at repurchase, when to, how to rehost and when to replatform is going to get us a lot more bang to the buck. And so using the color coding tools, part of what we do is there's a path to get from point A to point B. How do you get from where you are with your on-premise systems up into production, up in the cloud? And again, you can see when you look at rehosting, right? We do an analysis of your environment, of the applications, who uses them, how they're used, how they integrate, where's the data, what links are into that data, all of the interdependencies. And again, part of your environment might rehost, we might replace, we might replatform, we might even retain some. So when we look at rehosting, we've got tools that help automate it, but we can also, if need be, do manual migrations to get you up into the cloud, into that validation process, transition your team, and get you into production. Replatforming, as you might imagine, because you are talking about changing some of the components of your system, usually on the back end and that infrastructure, there are more steps to take, right? Similarly with replace, where you're pulling something out, moving data, replacing how you access it, things of that nature. And obviously Refactor is the most complex, right? So as you can imagine, cost for rehosting, replatforming, and replacing is going to be less than refactoring. And it's going to scale based on the complexity of your systems, your data, your applications, and your environment. And so when we look at the effort and the impact, right? The effort to repurchase is often, in the cost is often the lowest, and the time to migrate is actually some of the quickest. And that's, why is that? Well, it makes it makes perfect sense. QuickBooks, Intuit with their QuickBooks, you want to move off the desktop version and move into the cloud, they have a tool and it brings your data in and recreates your file and processes it for you. You're really just sitting watching, hoping there's no mistake. Rehosting, obviously, because you're specifying systems, building them out, migrating applications, migrating data, a little more effort and cost, a little more time to do it. But again, even more benefit. Replatforming is similar, it steps up. And of course, refactoring is the largest migration. Now, you get what you gain in business agility and values, unsurprisingly goes up with the level of commitment, right? And so it gives you a little bit more flexibility there. So why are organizations and why are we encouraging people to consider lift and shift for their next move? First and foremost, we'll talk about mobile and remote users, because that's sort of with COVID-19 where our heads are at right now. But they're more fundamental issues, right? First, we'll talk about end of life. We'll talk about the impact if you have multiple business locations. We'll talk about remote mobile users. Don't worry. We'll talk about business continuity, and we'll talk about transformation. And I know that's a buzzword, but it is a reason to look at this. So when we look at, Microsoft, for example, at end of life, right? We know that Microsoft Windows Server has passed end of life. 2010 is coming up. I don't remember the exact date. Server 2012 is going to be end of life in January 2023. That's not that far away. Windows 7 is past end of life. Windows 8 is coming up. SQL Server, different versions, all with either have recently or in the horizon reached or will receive end of life. So what happens with end of life, and you upgrade those systems, if you will, whether it's an operating system or infrastructure like SQL Server, is it typically drives new hardware demands as well. And map that in with the fact that when you look at hardware, most server hardware is designed to have a 5-year lifespan. When you refresh, you tend to overbuy, right? So, and why? Because when you make the hardware investment, you're projecting what your need is. And maybe you're not projecting it out 5 years, but you're probably projecting it out 2 or 3. So if you have a server that's reached end of life and you look at it and you're like, we have a terabyte of disk space, we're using 700 gig, performance is slow because of that. So when we buy that server, you might look and say, gee, a terabyte ain't going to cut it. We better bump it up to 2, right? Oh, we need more memory. We need more cores because we're going to get upgrades to our applications. We're going to get a new version of SQL Server. You're buying for the future. And so you're effectively buying resources that you're not using currently, will take you time to grow into, and you may never actually grow into them. We also see a lot of small businesses as they move to upgrade, particularly between, with virtualization, and the pitch that with virtualization, the incremental capability comes at an incremental cost. We'll see organizations go from having an application server, an Active Directory server, and a file server to having, 2 pieces of hardware, have a primary direct AD server, a secondary or backup AD server that's not also serving as the file service or the application server. We'll then see the push to have the database on one virtual machine and the application on another, and then have a dedicated file server that may or may not be used for the files for the application. And so you end up adding complexity and adding cost. And yes, it's more managed. You can better manage performance. You can isolate issues, but at what cost? You're still on that 3 to 5 year lifespan and replacement cycle. In the industry, there's a joke, we call it the forklift upgrade, right? Because one thing ages out, you go to update it, there's compatibility issues, you need more capacity. Next thing you know, the forklift is unloading the equipment from the truck and driving into your business. The second issue we talk about is multiple locations, right? And as companies have more than one location, you start getting into how do you secure the communications between and how do you provide the performance. And so you have many options, whether it's a managed MPLS service, SD-WAN, point-to-point WAN services, or even using VPNs over direct internet and public internet channels. All of those add layers of operation that hurt performance, that can impact reliability and add to cost. Those point-to-point VPNs can use the internet for sure, which lowers some of your networking costs, but it greatly increases your configuration complexity and has a huge performance overhead that can impact people's ability to do the job. And when we talk about, connecting multiple locations, it's not just having the connection, it's having enough bandwidth so that the applications run well and they attend. And if you're connecting across multiple locations and it's not just an extension of your LAN, but you actually then need to do a remote desktop or a virtual desktop infrastructure environment on top of your remote connection, you're building a lot of infrastructure for something that you can get more cost effectively and with better performance elsewhere. Moving to the cloud, you really shift this to having a single point of contact, and you can greatly minimize your infrastructure. So we talk about lift and shift. Rather than connecting 4 physical locations, you're connecting 3 locations to one cloud service. And you're not necessarily engaging with all the overhead and all the complexity you have if you're doing it on premise. And by the way, when we think about multiple locations now, we have to think about people who are working from home. And think of that as an office location. It's a home office, and you want that person to work as effectively there as you can. And so, remote users definitely include that work at home, but they also include the people who are mobile and out in the street. The advantage of lifting and shifting is the connection methods that we use to get people into that secure network and server environment and desktop environment that's up in the cloud. Those solutions are device and location agnostic. We can leverage any available internet service, and because it's only screen, it's only screen keyboard IO and mouse action, it optimizes the use of that bandwidth. We can avoid expensive infrastructure that you have when you're building this on site. When you go to build on site, most firewalls now have very limited VPN capacity, so you're looking at VPN equipment. Or behind the firewall, you might need to put in remote desktop service gateway servers and connection brokers, particularly if you have enough people working remote that you need to load balance or manage capacity. And then you'll often see PC to PC mirroring, which I mentioned earlier, that remote PC strategy, where you're now using 2 full pieces of equipment to provide service to each user. And so it creates a very different user experience. When we look at cloud remote desktop as a solution, we're avoiding on-premise hardware. You don't need the VPN gateways. You don't need your own a fleet of servers or a number of hardware devices with multiple VMs on it. And so here's an architecture diagram for a cloud desktop. You can see you've got your remote clients in the upper left-hand corner. Now this happens to be one that is on the Azure infrastructure. We can do this on GCP just as easily. And basically, using the Azure model, in that Azure, you have a couple of resources. There's a virtual gateway server that provides the connection. There's a server that, or depending on scale, servers that provide your active domain service, your DNS, your file server, as well as connection and licensing server. And then you've got what are known as the RD host sessions. And those are effectively the computer you're using to do your work. So those remote clients, they're providing you the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen, your audio, your video in and out, if you will, and the ability to connect to peripherals. But the actual processing work is being done on those remote desktop session hosts that are up in the cloud as well. And the beautiful thing about this is it scales. We can, the number of RD host sessions and the number of servers you need or virtualized servers you need to host can adjust up and down based on the workflow and the schedule of your business. And so that scalability creates a resource. There's some other side effects here as well that we can talk about, such as if you're not processing heavy on your remote clients, then the older laptop, the older desktop that might not have the processor oomph or the live memory or a fast disk for caching still becomes an effective tool, and you can extend the life of your existing end user devices. Business continuity. This is more than data restore. I could spend, and I have spent, the full hour on this topic in the past. It's all about how will you manage your return to operations or your RTO should something happen. And a great business continuity solution is not just going to look at what's left on premise, but the servers you're moving into the cloud, whether it means having redundancy and mirroring and across data centers, or at the very least being able to restore any corrupt data that might happen stored in the cloud versus on-premise. Having it in the cloud has some advantages when it comes to business continuity. First, that geo-redundancy comes at a minimal incremental cost. It's built in to levels of service for disk and for other for storage space and other services within both Azure and GCP. And you're limited from disaster risk because you're in a well-run, well-managed, secure, well-placed, well-powered, well-cooled data center run by an organization that's whole focus is to keep that up and running. It's not to say there aren't disruptions, performance hits, or outages. There can be, but the likelihood, particularly in the case of a disaster, is much less. And with the ability to have geo-redundancy, you can avoid the impact of local or regional disasters almost in their entirety. The last is about transformation. I know digital transformation is such a buzzword. What does it mean? I always think back, I'm going to date myself to the late 1990s with Michael Hammer and business process reengineering. It's a new twist on an old tale, if you will. Transformation is about looking at your desired business outcomes, how your business attains them, coming up with ways to improve it. And the reason it's digital transformation is because the power of what we have in cloud services right now enable you to do more in that transformative process. It's a more powerful tool set so that you can think further about how you might change things to make things better. And it's easier to start in the cloud. It's easier to remove redundant services. And this is a basic form of transformation. Some of it just see as cost cutting, but we really see, if you've got 3 systems doing the same thing and you really only need one, it's easy to consolidate to that one when you're in the cloud. You want to connect your data to your collaboration tools. That opens up a whole world of information for analysis and action. And our cloud environments now are ripe with low-code and no-code tools that help you automate your processes, your workflows, and your data flows. And so all of that is a side effect of lift and shift. Just moving your servers doesn't get you and doesn't transform you per se, but it gives you a place where you're at the platform where you can then get on the train and take that transformation ride and drive your future down the rails. So always some considerations if you're looking at lift and shift. With respect to migration, we worry about timing, cost, and the user impact. Those you want to manage those carefully, plan them out. Communication is always critical in these types of efforts, so your users know what to expect. Utilization, understanding whether you need all of your systems and services running 7x24, or we can manage it into shifts or schedules. When we can manage it into shifts or schedules, we can affect some pretty significant cost savings in your operating cost. And we're happy to talk about that in more detail if you have questions there. Additionally, there's a strategic decision. Some people, when they lift and shift, organizations will effectively extend their local area network. They'll make the local area network in their office, connect it by secure network-to-network VPN, and run the servers up in the cloud. And that's great, and it works for certain types of applications. Other organizations, for other applications, will look at the remote desktop and saying, hey, all I want on my laptop or the PC or the Mac I'm using is, give me an icon, click, let me log in. I know that I'm actually working on a processor with memory and disk space up in the cloud. Let me see what I'm doing. Let me control it. Have that keyboard, mouse, audio, video, I/O, but have the actual processing done securely in that secure virtualized network up in the cloud in the data center. And the other thing we really talk about, considering that, it's last, it's certainly not least. In fact, it's the most important thing is what are the desired outcomes? What are the business results that you're looking for your business? And what do you want out of a lift and shift migration? Is it just cost savings? Is it efficiency? Are you avoiding downtime? Are you making it more convenient? In talking to some businesses recently, we're talking with a small company of about 20 people. Their prime motivation to lift and shift is that individuals VPNing or remote PCing into their network is slow. And not only are they looking to have it better for their existing staff, but given how much more comfortable people are working remotely and working from home since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, they've decided that to find the talent they need and want for their business, they're going to extend the recruiting out of their geographic area. And if they're going to hire people who live halfway or all the way across the country, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 time zones away, they want that person to be as effective and efficient as possible. And so as they look to rethink their business and what it means to have employees and where they work, etc., they're looking at creating a more robust, better environment that'll support that in a positive way. And so they're looking for a business result that's a little different. They think they'll be a more profitable business if they can hire better talent to meet their needs. And if they don't have to be geographically constrained, that's great. They know their current systems. If they hire someone remotely, they would expect that person to be frustrated with performance and reliability. It would not be a good employment experience, and they'd worry about losing that employee, to be perfectly honest. And they've had some existing employees basically say, look, I can't do my job well anymore. I'm not happy here. So they're trying to fix that. So whether your business results is more tangible or something along the lines of internal productivity, you're looking to enable your business or empower your people, those are the desired outcomes we want to hear about and talk about considerations. On top of that, we look at total cost of ownership. What are you looking at over the next 3 to 5 years in your IT services, upgrades, realignments, etc.? And what does that look like if we're able to move you into the cloud, give you scalability, give you flexibility, better access, and lower infrastructure costs? Here's a larger version of the diagram I showed earlier, just to reinforce, to give you a picture of what a lift and shift looks like. Your servers, are at that, are really the purple in the center. You may have multiple of those for different applications, but you're really leveraging the scalability and the flexibility of the cloud environment. So we spin it back around. Up front, I talked about performance, availability, reliability, cost, and security. So, of course, this is where we end up at the end of the session as well, or at the end of the conversation. So one thing we know, right, is that when people are working remotely and your servers are on premise, that however you connect in is going to have a performance hit. Businesses, whether, even if you have a high-speed broadband connection, unless it's an enterprise-grade connection that's symmetrical up and down, your upload speed will hurt you, particularly the remote workers. When we move things into and lift and shift into the cloud, you don't need point-to-point links. You don't need to worry about what's the speed at the house versus the office. It's how fast of an internet connection is your device on. You're talking direct to the internet. You're going into a data center with effectively unlimited bandwidth. There's no overloading. There's no added layers. Some businesses connecting to their cloud-based networks and servers still need VPN. That's great. But again, you need that layer. That's fine. It'll work, but there's less management, there's less overhead, and there's less cost. Availability. It's accessible from any device. You're operating in data centers that, the mediocre ones start at 99.9% uptime. The better ones start adding nines after the decimal point. And you've got that back-end bandwidth that you're not going to have to worry about capacity. Reliability, it creates lifting and shifting into the cloud. It creates a simpler user experience, significantly fewer points of failure, and built-in high availability and geographic availability options. The cost. Dollar for dollar, will your total cost be comparable or less? Probably. In most instances, they are. More importantly, you're getting rid of capital expenditures and you're moving it into operational expenses and operating expenses that are scalable, that you can fluctuate up and down with the needs and the changes in the business, even operating times and staffing levels. You're reducing your infrastructure and you're extending the life of your clients, of the PCs and the laptops that your employees and your staff are using day to day. Security, the security is built into the ecosystem. You've got multi-factor authentication. You've got single sign-on. You can layer in security as needed for your line of business and your security requirements. It's integrated. What you're not doing is building it from scratch, and you're not buying components and piecing them together. So it gives you a much more unified experience. So moving from on-premise, in addition to improving your workers' ability to be empowered and get their jobs done efficiently day to day, you're improving your cost infrastructure, you're going to increase your security, the availability, reliability, and the resilience of your business. There are many, many wins. And so that's why we see, particularly as businesses are very comfortable using the cloud now for what we call the productivity suite: email, calendars, contacts, file storage and sharing, hopefully some workflow automation, hopefully cloud-based editors and not total reliance on desktop applications. The next step is to take your business systems and get them in the cloud. And the first step is often that rehosting, that lift and shift. And so what's the action we want you to take here today? One, let's assess. Let's assess your business objectives and outcomes, where you are, what do you need? How's your business running on a day-to-day basis? One of the things we've talked about in some of our recent blog posts is that in the scramble back in February, March, and April for people to work remote, especially people who historically have only ever worked in the office, we did a lot of things to connect people and get them working from home. Many of those steps, while efficient at the time, came with inconveniences. And now that we realize that some degree of remote work or hybrid office use is going to be here probably for another 6 to 9, possibly 12 months from where we are today, here in October of 2020, that those inconveniences are actually over time hurting productivity, and in some cases damaging morale. So let's look at your business objectives, the desired outcomes, your current need, and your readiness. From there, we can map out solutions and a path to get there. We can explore the value proposition. It's not just the cost of doing the project, it's what's the cost to not doing it. What are the impacts that you're seeing in your business? What are the risks you're facing? What are the challenges you're going to face over the next 1 to 3 years, particularly if you don't make a change for the better? So we'll look at the cost of doing and the cost of not doing. And then we get into planning. What's the strategic plan? What's it going to look like? And what are the tactical phases? And maybe you're at a point where you only implement phases 1 and 2, and we see another 2 or 3 phases out there over time. We can stop and reassess the path forward as well. And so the action we ask you to do is think about it, assess, define your value proposition, and then let's plan. And of course, contact us. Because you contact us, we can help you through all of those phases. So at this point, we're almost 45 minutes into the hour. So in the session here, so I want to open it up for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please open up that questions window using the icon at the top or the top or the right-hand side of the screen. I'm going to take a break here to get a sip. My throat's a little dry. Excellent. And for those who are watching the recording, this is the point where I'm going to stop the recording. If you do have any questions, you can contact us. Email address info@cumulus.com. Our toll-free and toll numbers are up on the screen, or you can reach out to me directly. I don't have an assistant. Those come to my inbox, Falcon@cumulusglobal.com. My phone number's there, but I will tell you I'm much better at responding to emails than I am to voicemail. So you're much better off sending me an email message than leaving a phone message. So for those watching this as a recording, I want to thank you for doing so and wish you a great day. Please let us know how we can help, and we look forward to you participating in the future event.